himself, and of course, a legendary icon in the movies industry. And today, I have my officially co-host, Mr. Bob Lemon.
Hey, how you doing? How's it going today, Daniel?
Fabulous, fabulous like you, Mr. Bob. And as usual, can you please introduce yourself as my
Sure, my name's
co-host?
sure. My name is Bob Lament. I do various things on the internet, and one of them is this Movie 101.
Movie 101, because we love movies, people. So, Mr. Bob, what will be our topic for today?
Well, the Thanksgiving's coming up in a couple of weeks, and I thought it would be good for us to talk about planes, trains, and automobiles because everybody will be traveling. And this is, I think, officially the Thanksgiving movie.
Officially, people, because it's all about traveling.
About the horrors of traveling, perhaps.
Yes, horror. So, who directed the planes and trains and automobiles?
So John Hughes was the director of this movie, and he also wrote it. For the
Wow.
main part, right? I'm sure he had help from other people, but I think he's credited with being the writer as well. So yeah, and it's part of. If you go into John Hughes' history, he did a bunch of 80s teen movies, which he became famous for. But this is part of the next phase of his more adult oriented movies, still comedies, like still I would call them really dramedies because they're not pure comedy. They do have some you know drama to them and tugging at the heartstrings. And so dramedy, I hate the word dramedy, but essentially that's kind of what it is. So
Yes. And who are the two main characters in the planes and
we've
trains?
got our two main characters are Steve Martin as Neil Page and John Candy, the late John Candy, as Del Griffith. And they're the two main people in the movie, although we do have kind of secondary characters, and I don't know all the actors for these, but which is Steve Martin's wife and his children. And then Del has a wife that we only see in pictures. We never see her, in a person. We see, Steve Martin's wife waiting for him and his kids doing things, but we never see Dell's wife in any kind of flashback. We only see her in pictures that he carries with him,
Yes.
which is pertinent to the story. I don't know. I mean, are we doing? It's an old movie, so whatever we talk about, if you don't want to know about the movie, you pretty much better,
We can spoil
stop
it,
here
right?
and watch it and then come back because we're going to talk about what happens.
Yes. We can spoil these movies already, right? It's been a
Yeah,
long time.
exactly.
Spoilers are allowed, people. So,
That's right. But
and
it's
yes,
what is
thank
it,
you, Mr. Hodges.
87 or something?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Hodges, for sharing your talent for directing planes and trains because we love it. So,
Mm-hmm.
in what city does the movie begin, Mr. Bob?
So it begins in New York City, and so it's just ahead of Thanksgiving, which it's a little closer to Thanksgiving than we are, but just like a few days before Thanksgiving. And Steve Martin's character, he is a advertising or marketing person, and he starts out in somebody's office. He's showing a big client, some sketchups or workups of some kind of layout for magazine or something, and he needs to get home. He needs to catch a plane to get home for Thanksgiving. That's his plan. And the big wig is taking too much time, and so he's running late. Basically, the interesting thing about this setup is that with John Hughes is that he used a lot of the same actors in his movies. And so the funny thing is with Steve Martin is Ferris Bueller's dad.
Oh, Dad,
Lyman
yeah.
Ward is an actor who played Ferris Bueller's dad, and he is in the scene with Steve Martin. And Lyman Ward played an advertising executive in Ferris Bueller. So he pulls, you talk about the MCU and the universe for Marvel. John Hughes had a universe, and
Okay.
Lyman Ward is playing the same character that he was in Ferris Bueller, because he has to get back to Chicago as well, but he decided to take a later flight rather than the earlier flight, which Steve Martin decided to go on. And they talk about this. And it's very interesting because when people saw it, I know they probably recognized the person, but they probably didn't tie the two together as tightly as they actually were. So these were, people who were, part of it. Now, the interesting thing is the other person that's part of John Hughes' world was William Wyndham, who plays the executive, but he was in a movie called She's Having a Baby as one of the in-laws and not as an executive in New York. And so it's funny how he's got two characters that are from two actors from other John Hughes movies playing different characters. So one's still playing Ferris's dad essentially, and the other one is playing a totally new character. What makes it even more bizarre, if you can think, is whenever Steve Martin is trying to catch a cab. So he finally gets out of the meeting, he gets down to the street in New York, and it's just, it is New York City. So it is packed and crazy and people everywhere. And he's trying to leave at, around 5 o'clock, which is rush hour. And he's trying to get a cab, and he spies a cab, and he spies somebody across the street, and that's Kevin Bacon, who is a star of She's Having a Baby. And
Yes.
Kevin Bacon in that movie is an advertising person. So they all fit together. So he is playing his same character, but he's an advertising person from Chicago, from a different firm, I'm assuming. And so he's playing that character, and he essentially gets the cab, and Steve Martin doesn't get that cab, and it sets into motion. This is the total setup for why Steve Martin is aggravated for pretty much the rest of the movie, because he can't get a cab. And it also sets up his introduction to Del Griffin. So, I mean, it's a lot going on in the first, 10 minutes of this movie, and it sets up so much stuff. It sets up him trying to get home. It sets up his wife waiting for him. It sets up, all these characters, and it also sets up his introduction to, who will become his traveling partner, Del Griffin. So it's masterful if you think about it, as far as the script goes, and as far as execution and so forth. And you really pretty much know Steve Martin's character at the end of that little, setup. Now, Del Griffin, you don't really know. He's only seen, just a little bit. Basically, he's seen stealing the cab from Neil Page, but innocently. He didn't do it, maliciously. And and but so now you don't know who Del is, but you've glimpsed him, and then they come together basically at the airport waiting to get on the plane. And so, but I think if you think about it as far as the scenes go, it really was very well done, and the setup was there, right? So it threw these people together. Neil, already aggravated because he's fighting, he's fighting to get home, he's fighting travel, he's fighting, the city of New York. And then he finally, meets up with Del, and they get kind of thrown together, but they're at this point, when they recognize each other, Del is very innocent and doesn't, he's like, I think I know you, but I don't know where. And Steve Martin's like, oh, I know where I know you. You stole my cab. And so then that starts up their first interaction, which is Neil is angry, and Del is kind of a lovable, goofball.
Guy. Yes.
But it's great set up, and so forth. But I think interesting thing about this movie, we won't necessarily go scene for scene through all of it, but to me, it and people have said this, I'm pretty sure, but this movie is definitely John Candy at his best. So
Yes.
late great John Candy, he's playing a character that has to be so annoying and yet so endearing. Whereas Steve Martin is basically playing kind of an uptight executive who's annoyed, but um, but John Candy really has to carry this relationship because he can't be just annoying. He has to be endearing, and he pulls it off. And I think he had really had the hard role in the movie, and I don't think that people give him enough credit for this movie and his acting ability because you love the guy even though he's a pain in the neck.
Yes.
When you watch
For
it, you're
sure.
like, God, he's annoying, but you can't help but, you know, love him because he's so fun. And it's one of those situations where had it been a different actor, I mean, if you pick somebody from the 80s who would have gone, possibly been in these roles, um, instead of John Candy, it wouldn't have worked. I don't think that this movie had Candy been replaced, the movie would fall apart. It wouldn't work. Steve Martin probably could be replaced. No offense to Steve Martin, but
Jim Carrey.
yeah, his role wasn't as tough because I mean, he was, you know, he was the
Something.
annoyed one. And he wasn't mean or anything, but he was, that's a little bit easier because he's just constantly reacting off of Candy. But for the audience, you know, he's this lovable guy. And even though all his faults, you still love him. And that's so hard to pull off, I think, as an actor, to be that charming. Um, but the planes, trains, and automobiles title comes from the fact that they have to take all these modes of transportation to get home. They're for whatever reason they know we know that Steve Martin's going to Chicago,
Yes.
and he's our catalyst. He's the driver of the plot. Del Griffith seems to be going to Chicago, but we have no idea why. It's never really totally explained. He just seems to be going in the same direction. And when we get to the end of the movie, we come to find out maybe he didn't need to go to Chicago. I
Yes.
mean, if you think about it, maybe he just was going along for the ride with Steve Martin because it was something to do. Um, and so I can we bounce around or do you want to go in sequence?
The consequence. And in the story, what do you think the main theme or message that they want to convey?
that's that's a good question because this is one of those movies, and I will say this a lot. I talk about movies at home, so I say
Yes.
this a lot to my family. But I love this movie because it is not incredibly complicated on the surface. It really, the whole plot of it is Neil is trying to get home to Chicago, and he gets hooked up with Dell, and they have misadventures, right?
Yes.
That is the plot. If you had to describe it to somebody, that's what you'd say. And comedy ensues, right? But the reality of it is that it's way deeper than that. It's about two people, from disparate backgrounds, but not too disparate, you know what I mean? But somewhat different backgrounds coming together to try to, overcome some adversity, right? And personality issues because um they're not what you would think as compatible personalities. And you get to delve into their personalities a bit. I think John Candy seems a little deeper than Steve Martin in his performance for this, but you really you feel like these people by the end of the movie, and how they react to things and how they handle things and so forth. And it really is, a buddy movie, if anything, even though you would never describe it as a buddy movie because they're not buddies. you know.
Yes.
Steve Martin, Steve Martin doesn't want to be
Accidentally.
his buddy. Most of the time, he's like, they go and get on the plane. They get redirected to Wichita. Uh, Dell says, "Ah, you should have got a hotel because we're not getting out of here because of the snowstorm in Chicago. O'Hare shut down." And then he brings Neil along with him to the hotel. Comedy ensues, as it were, with a lot of different little elements. I mean, the cab driver is funny. The when they go to the check in, it's funny. Everybody knows Dell, right? Nobody knows Neil. Neil operates in a whole different world, and he's been pulled into Dell's world. And but then there's only one room, and so they have to share the room. And I mean, it's all these little set pieces that are done so perfectly. I mean, they fit together like a puzzle, even though they're not. They're not they're not that precise. They're just set pieces for different things. The bathroom at the hotel is a little set piece. Them in sleeping had to sleep together because there's only one bed was a set piece. But as you move through it, it all fits together and it all seems to make total sense. But in reality, if you think about it, you're like, these are all just little bits, you know. But
Yes.
what holds it together is these two people, right? And
Yes.
Dell's trying to be the nice guy. He is being the nice guy, but it's
Yes.
not super nice because nothing goes right. I mean, we don't, he uh, Steve Martin, Neil's in the bathroom taking a shower. He runs out of water, hot water, gets, no towels. Dell is not nice in the sense that he kind of does, he's used to being by himself, I think. And he does things that would be rude, but he's not rude, right? Whenever you look
Yes.
at him, you're like, oh, this poor guy.
So do you
It's
think,
fantastic.
yes, so do you think, Mr. Bob, this is the best of Mr. John Hughes?
Yes, yeah, it is one of the best ones. Although I like all of his movies. I think all of them have, um, they have a certain amount of heart to them. So every one of his movies is very much linked to people, right? It's not, even though in this one, there's a lot of interesting effects with them, driving the wrong way down the highway and and the car burning up and all this kind of stunt work and things like that. But it's really tied to the people and the personalities of these characters. And you totally, want to be in the back seat having the adventure. And that can't be said about, every movie. I mean, there's some movies where it's really just a spectacle and it's not about the people. And if you were stripped away the spectacle in this movie, which there's a little bit of that, you still want to watch it. You still want to be there. And I mean, it's just interactions. It's funny. Uh, they get their money stolen in the middle of the night, which is one of those kind of things that it suspends disbelief a little bit. But they get their money stolen and they're at each other at the diner, and then Dell starts selling shower curtains as earrings to all these people in the bus station. And it's just wacky stuff that happens. But I think through the whole thing, it really just shows the good nature of these people and their connection. And then after this, they he makes, because they had no money, so he goes and he makes money, some cash, and they have lunch or whatever. And then Neil says, "Well, maybe we should travel separately on the train," and uh, and then Dell is really hurt because now he's invested in this kind of buddy situation, and in it, even though it's not overt, right?
Yes.
It's not in your face. He's hurt, and he still wants to continue this situation that they're on. And then of course the train breaks down, and they have to continue it. And
Yes.
for me, part of the movie that I like a lot is this takes place mostly in the Midwest. So they go from New York on the plane to Wichita, Kansas, and then they're trying to make their way back from Wichita up to Chicago. And so, I mean, a lot of these places that they are in are places that I'm familiar with, right? So, I mean, I
Yes.
live around here, so it's great to see them. And and so when the train breaks down outside of Jefferson City, Missouri, which is the capital of Missouri, I mean, I don't know that they actually filmed that in Jefferson City, around Jefferson City, but it looks like it. I mean, that's what it looks like. It's just fields. There's not much around there. And then they make their way to St. Louis, where I'm from, right? And they
Oh
did
wow.
film. They did film the car rental. So they take the bus. They get on the bus and take it from Jefferson City to St. Louis, and they separate. Neil goes to get his car, and this is one of the set pieces of the movie. This is where Steve Martin shines the most, I think, in the movie, is the car rental scene, where he and Edie McClurg
Complain.
is complaining, and drops all the f bombs. And the funny thing is, though, that I know for a fact because I read about it, but I also know the area. He was at the airport at the St. Louis airport when they shot that. They shot that in St. Louis because the Lambert International Airport has a very distinctive look, and that was it. So now the Edie McClurg interchange probably wasn't, but all of the outside scenes where he's going from the car lot back up to the airport itself, that was all shot in St. Louis. And it just that was where Steve Martin shined in a way. But it was, everybody remembers that scene at the car rental counter, and Edie McClurg did a fantastic job of being the clerk who had to tell
Definitely.
him, that he's effed. So,
So, Mr. Bob, if you are John Hughes, or I think I pronounce Hugges, so I try to be a comedian. So I want to apologize for that. Mr. John Hughes,
Mhm.
if you will be the John Hughes, which part of the movie would you like to modify?
Oh, I don't know that I would modify anything. I think the only thing that I mean, it's an excellent movie, and if you've never seen it, you have to watch it. Even though it's from 1987, it is a must see, especially at this time of year. You have to watch it, and it's hilarious. It's got so many funny bits. Um, but I'd say one of the things that was kind of outside the norm, but they also had to ramp everything up. This is what movies have to up the stakes, right? Is the car thing where they catch the car on fire, and then they're driving around in a burnout car. I mean, that's a little bit beyond the norm, if you will. And so that would I, I I don't know how they could change it because it still is very funny, but
Yes.
it's not. It's a little bit out there, I would say. And then I think, but they never explain everything. So this is what I alluded to it earlier, was that John Candy's character, he ends up uh, at the end, he has Thanksgiving with Neil, and you realize that basically his wife has passed away some years ago, and he's not going home, right?
Yes.
He hasn't been home. His home is that giant piece of luggage, that case that he carries around. That's his home. But they never overtly say that. They never, um, they don't want you to pity John Candy, and they never let you do that. They only allude to it, right? Because that's why I think that basically this whole adventure with Del Griffith is the fact that he just went to Chicago because he got hooked up with Neil and it seemed like fun. It was a distraction. And, I don't think that he ever really even needed to be there.
Yes.
He's just a traveling salesman and he just goes where he wants to go and sells along the way. And, whenever he encountered Neil, he's like, yeah, I think originally he was supposed to fly to Chicago, but there's never anything in Chicago that he is going to. Because you remember they find him at the end. He leaves him at the L station, and he goes back and he's still at the L station because he really doesn't have anywhere to go. He's trying to decide what he's going to do over the holiday because he can't sell anything during that time period. But they don't overtly tell you that. It's all implied. And I think that's another part of this story is that just like real life, you can't know everything. And it's
Yes.
not going to be plain and easy. It's difficult and it's private. And they got that across. And so, you know, we don't know what Dell was going to do, but we can assume that with his wife being passed away and so forth, that he just really had nowhere to go, and he just was going to go to Chicago and wait it out until the holiday was over.
So do you think,
So
Mr. Bob,
very
this
human.
movie is qualified for an award?
Oh yeah, I don't think it won any awards. Let me look real quick. I don't think that it won. If it did win some, I'm not aware of it, but I think
Best
um,
comedy of the year.
it should. Well, I think everybody agrees with that, but I don't think that it ever got any love from the Academy or or anything like that. And at the time, to be honest with you, I don't. I saw it back in '87. I know I did, but I
Yes.
don't think that it was a super popular movie. I'm trying to look and see if I can. I'm looking on the IMDb to see if I can find anything
But
about it,
hilarious.
but I don't think so. Yeah, so it was made for 15 million. It worldwide gross 50 million. So it made money. Opening weekend was 7 million, which, opening weekend is typically for movies, opening weekend is when they make all their money back. So
Yes.
it didn't make all its money back in the opening weekend. This has been a slow earner, right? So this came out at the time of video stores, and I can tell you it was a big hit on
DVD.
VHS.
Oh, yes.
I worked at a video store when I was young.
Before. Yeah.
Yeah, and when it came out on video, it was in demand. And so it wasn't like a critical success at the time, and I don't think it won any awards, but certainly, this to me, this is one of those things where it's at the time people didn't give it the credit that it needed, and now that time has gone on, it's kind of like a Christmas Story, which is a Christmas movie. At the time when Christmas Story came out, that was '83. Nobody thought anything about it. I think it did fine. It wasn't a blockbuster, just like this wasn't a blockbuster at the time. But over time they watch it again and they're like, gosh, this is a really well done movie with a great story that is so relatable that you can't, not like it. And then it's on top of it, it's incredibly funny. So
Yes.
what's not to like?
I I agree with you, Mr. Bob. So to sum up our discussion about planes, trains, and automobiles, if you rate this movie 1 to 10, where is it?
Oh, easily a 10, don't you think?
Yes, I
Daniel,
agree.
don't you think it's a 10? And
Yes.
I will tell you that we watch it every year at Thanksgiving.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
I've seen this movie
Many times.
many, many, many times, and we'll watch it again coming up here in a week or so.
That'd be awesome. So what's your favorite dialogue for this movie?
Oh gosh.
That's saying the bad words, complaining.
Well, I do love that scene. I mean, it's a great scene,
Yes.
but I mean, I've read, some things that John Hughes really enjoyed working on this movie. He really enjoyed working with John Candy and Steve Martin and let them just do take after take after take. And John Candy, who was an improviser, right? He comes from Second City Television up in Toronto. He was actually in Chicago, I think, for a while, but in Toronto, Second City. I think he was one of the first. He started out in Chicago, went to Toronto when they opened the Toronto Second City Theater, and then was there until he got, went and got popular and so forth. But anyway, he says so many funny things. I mean, to me, one of the best scenes is when he's selling the earrings and he's just lying to these people, but he's doing it in such a nice way that he's
Yes.
like, these are Daryl Strawberry autographed earrings. And I'm like, why? Who would come up with that? You know what I mean? And I think he just was riffing on that the whole time, and they just took takes that they liked. Diane's, these are moon earrings. They're very light. I mean, he just said so many different things in that little scene that I thought it was funny, a funny way to present it and so forth. But the real, I think, take home is that John Candy, a terrific actor that didn't really get to do. He could have done so much more like this, and been a very serious actor, I believe, if he was given the chance. But because everybody just knew him as the big funny guy, that's kind of where he got pigeonholed. But this, if you watch this, it just shows you the range.
Yes, yes, yes. Again, Mr. John Hughes or Hughes, thank you so much for making this movie. We love it. We laugh a lot, right?
Oh yeah.
Is a classic comedy about two mismatched travelers. So, Mr. Bob, can you please invite our listeners to our viewers to watch this movie?
Oh, definitely. You can't. You shouldn't. You should at least see it once in your life. It's gonna be fun no matter what. You gotta
Yes,
watch it. You have to watch it.
watch it. Highly recommended.
The
All these
highest.
but goodies, people.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So, Mr. Bob, do you have something to promote or something to,
Ah, not. I mean, you can. I bop around the internet doing different things, but my home base is Static Radio. You can always come listen to some funny stuff at staticradio.com.
being comedian, right?
Yeah, trying.
Yes. Try, try,
I'm no
try.
John
Yes.
Candy, but you know.
And I want to promote my book 101 review. People, please do listen to my feature author of the month of November, Mr. Jones Everett or Everett Jones. He is award-winning and best-selling author. So please do listen to our 5 episodes this month. So, Mr. Bob, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Daniel. Talk to you next time.
More to come, people. See you soon. Another great discussion, Mr.